The program will begin in 5 minutes. The program will begin shortly. Welcome to the inaugural Aspen Ideas Climate, a collaboration between the Aspen Institute and the City of Miami Beach. Please use the hashtag Aspen Ideas Climate on social media. Thank you for joining us. Please remember to turn your mobile devices to silent. Please welcome from the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program, Greg Gershuni.
Good evening, everyone. Those were the sounds of the Everglades by Gustavo Matamoros. I'm Greg Gershuni, the co-director of Aspen Ideas Climate, and I run the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program. We work to move people, organizations, and governments towards taking greater action on climate change, or in the framing of Tony Lazarewicz's Six Americas, to move people down the pathway towards being more concerned and more motivated to take action. We do this through events like this, Aspen Ideas Climate, but also through more focused dialogue where we bring together leaders from government, businesses, nonprofits, and others to build consensus towards taking specific action. We do this across a number of topics, from energy policy in the US and globally, tearing down barriers and scaling deployment of solutions, to decarbonizing ships and ports, as well as schools and school buses. We work on resilience and adaptation, like access to drinking water, wildfire resilience, and coastal resilience and sea level rise. And we build relationships for cooperation by connecting leaders in the US with those in China, India, and across Europe, by bringing together, and we bring together future leaders like we did this week at the summit. The core of this work is about bringing people together. And so I hope this week you found tremendous value in the sessions, the talks, the field trips, and the other events, but you also met someone that you wouldn't have otherwise, that you had a conversation and found some common ground, or that you made a new connection that you might build a future partnership or business to move the world towards taking greater action on the climate crisis. Tonight's program is all about that, building the relationships that we need to solve climate change. So tonight, we're going to hear from two former Republican congressmen who have a vision for how conservatives can make progress on this topic. Katherine Murdoch will share why doomsday reporting isn't helping and what she sees as the media's role in all of this. Environmental activist and Aspen K-12 Climate Action Commissioner Vic Barrett will talk about the obligation that schools have to empower students to advance a sustainable future. Joan Salwen of Blue Ocean Barns in Hawaii will show how to reduce cow emissions. And finally, the mayors of Cleveland and New Orleans will talk about how their cities are making progress on this critical issue. So join me in welcoming the first speakers.
Please welcome Greg Walden, Carlos Curbelo, and Rich Powell of ClearPath.
All right. The elephants have literally entered the room.
We're all here.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks first to the incredible team at Aspen for this incredible week, this incredible forum. I really have to say before we start, there is virtually no person or team that I know of more dedicated to finding genuine bipartisan solutions to this issue than Greg Gershony and his fantastic team at the Aspen Energy Environment. Let's give them a huge round. And next, of course, I want to thank our incredibly distinguished guests here, starting to my far right with Congressman Carlos Curbelo, who formerly represented this area. So thank you for throwing this off for us, Carlos, and thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us. And of course, former Republican chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's a small committee with a narrow jurisdiction in Washington, D.C., Greg Walden from the great state of Oregon. So I'll just say a few things before turning to questions to these two really incredible conservative leaders on climate change. In my view, too often, energy and climate policy is reduced to false choices. Democrats versus Republicans, 100% renewable energy versus no action at all, global emissions reductions versus no emissions at home. All of these false choices too often trap us in what I view as some really unproductive discussions. We think the reality is that public policy must focus on making the global clean energy transition cheaper and faster. The first priority must be to work with markets to make clean energy more affordable so it can be adopted here in the US and exported abroad. And we think conservatives, despite what you may or may haven't heard, have really adopted this approach. What I'd like to dive into today with our panel is to really get into the minds of conservative policymakers, how you think about climate change. I think I'm moving my head a little too much and we're echoing here. I'm gonna stop being so expressive. And then, since we're at a festival dedicated to ideas, I'd like to get into some of the big policy solutions that you all have thought about, proposed, worked on, and even enacted in Congress. Especially as we look forward to a November result where it's very likely, at least in the House of Representatives, Republicans will be back in the driver's seat. So both of our panelists here today have really unique perspectives on this and have been at the center of leading conservatives forward on climate legislation. Carlos Cabello, of course, is the former U.S. Congressman representing Florida's 26th district, which included much of this great city, as well as south through into the Keys, really ground zero for the climate impacts in the United States. In 2014, he was elected to Congress where he served on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the powerful Ways and Means Committee. Not quite as powerful as the Energy and Commerce Committee, but it's also a powerful committee. There's going to be a lot of back and forth about this. We're going to get tired of hearing it. Carlos also co-founded and co-chaired the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus and served in a leadership role in the Problem Solvers Caucus. He now leads a public affairs company and can be regularly seen on NBC and MSNBC as a political analyst. Greg represented Oregon's 2nd District from 1999 to 2021. He chaired the powerful House Energy and Commerce Committee, and as a member of that committee for 20 of his 22 years, he led a number of major legislative efforts, including one we'll talk about today, the passage of the landmark Energy Act of 2020. His colleagues twice elected him to lead the National Republican Congressional Committee, the national campaign arm for House Republicans, so he knows a little bit about politics as well. So before we get into the big ideas, let's just discuss a little bit about where we're coming from. Greg, I'm going to start with you. Speaker Pelosi was here on this stage on Monday night, and she presented a fairly, I think it's fair to say, a stark picture of the current state of climate politics in Washington. Not to get too political, but I must live in a very different DC than Speaker Pelosi does, because I see climate policy as one of the rare places where I feel like the two parties may actually be coming back together toward more consensus and more bipartisanship amongst many, many other, admittedly, very difficult issues. You passed the Energy Act of 2020 at a very partisan moment, but in divided government. Tell us a little bit about how a major piece of legislation. My body mic is being taken away. I moved my head too much. Tell us about how a major piece of legislation like that
comes together and how you built consensus amongst your colleagues and your committee to get that done.
Well, and I wasn't alone. I played a role in it, but it took Republicans and Democrats. It took House members and Senate members. I think there were 18 or more different individual pieces of legislation that made it up. It took 5 years. There were multiple committees involved. It turns out the framers of our way of government decided to make it really hard to pass law. And they were successful at that. And so when you want to get something done, I learned pretty early on, you needed to try and work together. And the less you did that publicly and the more you did that colleague to colleague, the more you could get into law. And I think that was the case here. There's a lot of common ground here. And I appreciate you referencing Speaker Pelosi. Look, we got to move faster. You can't meet the goals that we have to meet in time if we don't change how Washington works and how our government works and get the research and everything else. And I think that what we did in that 2020 Energy Act, if you think about it, is pretty unprecedented, in that you had Republican House, Democratic Senate, and Donald Trump in the White House. Everybody got together and we passed that into law. By the way, we did the same thing confronting the opioids crisis in America. We passed some 60 bills out of my committee. 57 of them became HR 6, which got signed into law as well. So there are these areas of grave concern in the country and the world where we can come together. But where it falls apart is when everybody goes to their corner and uses all the words that explode the other side. And then it makes it really hard for Republicans or Democrats to come together on the policy. We can get into more of that later. But I think this is a good bill. I think we've done things that need to be done for a long time in investment. You're going to have 20 commercial scale projects within 20 years that are going to reduce carbon. They're going to put new energy sources that are clean out there. It's really a pretty exciting time of what can come out of that legislation. Clearly, there's more to be done.
We'll talk more about the policy, but there was this major innovation wing. There was a huge package of incentives for wind and solar and capturing emissions from fossil fuels. There was even a regulatory ramp down of climate superpollutants, the HFCs. So the Biden administration just really trumpeted beginning to, take action on a legislative priority that was actually, championed by Republicans in the Senate and,
and many in the House.
Carlos, I'm going to turn to you. You really got a lot of this momentum going in your remarkable time in Congress. Frankly, in those early days, maybe you felt a little lonely. You were seen as a bit of a lone wolf as you got this thing going. But as you think about the evolution of these efforts, I mean, your bipartisan caucus, I think, laid the groundwork for the Conservative Climate Caucus, which now has more than 70 members, so that's more than 1/3 of all Republicans. It's also become one of the most active caucuses in the House, with lots of folks coming out to educational events and talking about policy, talking about technologies, all these things. Just share a little bit about your journey with us and why you decided to head out on what looked like a lonely road in the early days.
Sure. So just a quick short story. When I ran for Congress, climate and the environment were not the issues I ran on. It's not that I didn't care about them. I just was passionate about other issues, immigration, taxes, foreign policy, and I thought that's what I would dedicate most of my time in Congress to. But in 2015, during my first term, I had a meeting that spring with scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They showed me models for what the future of my district, Florida Keys and South Florida, could look like if we didn't, take action and pay attention to this issue. And I got together with the team after that, and I said, look, this is not my big issue. I've always cared about the environment, grew up in Florida, but it's just not. But we need to do this, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So I start going around to our Republican colleagues. Greg had elected 247 of us at the time, the largest majority for Republicans since the 1920s. And I swear I found maybe 3 or 4 people who had any interest in this topic. And by the way, this thing about denialism, there are very few Republicans then and now who deny the science. It just wasn't a priority. Apathy was a much bigger challenge than denialism. So about 3 or 4 people, we decided to start coming together, start having conversations, start trying to talk to our leaders, and we start this caucus. That first Congress, we had 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats, and we said, wow, this is a great success. By the end of the following Congress, we had 90 members, 45 Republicans and 45 Democrats. And think about that growth, right? Just in a matter of 2 or 3 years. So we're conditioned into thinking that we're so divided, because we are on a lot of issues, and of course the media focuses on those issues. But as you said, Rich, where we are now, I mean, it just gives me so much hope and optimism, because I know how it was. I know when there was no bipartisan dialogue whatsoever, no interest on the Republican side of the aisle, the only interest on the Democratic side of the aisle was just to kind of use the issue come campaign season. Now there's actually a good number of bipartisan lawmakers who care about this issue, and conservatives are leading in a lot of different ways with an innovation agenda, and they're at the table now. And I tell people, as long as people are at the table, as long as the issue is being discussed, it's alive. If no one's talking about it, the issue is dead. So it's a really hopeful time for those of us who believe in the power of good policies to solve all these issues, climate and resiliency.
Well, so let's talk about what's ahead. We're coming off of some really major legislation with the Energy Act and then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, which many conservatives also supported and were very, very active in. Clearly, there's a stalled, or at least very difficult partisan attempt on the Democratic side to get something done. We also find ourselves back in a global energy crisis. And if you look back, actually, the Energy Act of 2020 is an outlier. That was passed during a time of energy abundance, primarily to deal with climate change. Most of the big energy and climate bills we've ever passed were passed in times of energy scarcity and emergency, and we're back into that now. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are looking ahead, either to the remainder of this Congress or to the next, especially back into split control. What do you all see as possible? What do you see as coming together in terms of a significant bipartisan clean energy and climate legislation?
Well, I'd suggest a couple of things. We've got to look at the construction sector. We need to look at cement, 7% of global emissions, I think. But it's very expensive to invest in new kilns and everything else, but that's something we could work on together, I think. And again, I think we have to, while we have to act locally, we have to think globally and look at the emissions of producers of products not from America versus from America. If you think about natural gas, they say Russian gas is like 30%, whatever the number is, more of a pollutant than natural gas from here. Cement the same way, other products out there. And so I think as we deal with the pandemic issues, as we deal with what's happening in Ukraine, as we are reassessing the global supply chain. And as part of that global supply chain reassessment, we need to put in their emissions as well. Because we want the kind of stability in our power grid, we want the stability in our, whether it's medicines or foods or energy, right? And I think in this discussion, we should be talking about, and by the way, what about emissions? Do we make it cleaner? Can we make it faster? I also think permitting reform. Aspen did a whole segment a while back on reforming America's permitting system. It is so bureaucratic now that it just takes forever to get anything done. You can't meet the goals if you don't fix it. And that doesn't mean reducing the environmental standards. It means getting there quicker. And so you have more certainty and you'll get more investment and you'll get fewer emissions. I think there's a lot we can work on. That's
a lot. Carlos, how about you?
So if you look at the issues that conservatives have rallied around, there's a lot of potential there. Carbon capture sequestration, which, by the way, when I served in 2018, our good friends Paul Ryan and Kevin Brady fought tooth and nail against expansion of 45Q. Today, it's part of the Republican agenda. Right. So that just gives you some perspective on how things have come along. Direct air capture. climate resilience, investments in coastal communities and in other parts of the country where we really do need to adapt, right? Because we know that the effects of climate change are going to be with us forever. We just obviously don't want to prevent them from getting any worse. So there's a world of potential out there, and I'm particularly intrigued. Joe Manchin has now brought together this bipartisan group in the Senate again to try to save some of the climate provisions in the big Democratic bill. And there's a lot of discussion about a border carbon adjustment tax. And this is important because probably the strongest conservative argument against some climate policies is, hey, if we do right in the United States, but the rest of the world doesn't follow, we really are just punishing ourselves. And it's true. I mean, if the U.S. goes to zero, net zero tomorrow, and the rest of the world keeps going the way they are, it really doesn't, it might buy us a little time, make things a little better, but it doesn't solve the challenge. With this border carbon adjustment tax policy, number one, we recognize that the United States is in the midst of a serious, meaningful clean energy transition, and that a lot of other countries aren't. And what we're trying to do with that policy would be to export that clean energy transition. And by the way, this is a lot more valuable than some climate accord or some treaty that countries sign and then violate. This policy would really impose, and we don't have time to explain it, but look it up. This policy would really export the clean energy transition to the rest of the world and say, hey, if you want to do business with the United States, you have to at least meet our standards here, which are much higher than they are in the rest of the world. So, Rich, I think even in this Congress, there's still some potential for support for the clean energy transition, perhaps tax credits for solar, wind, and other clean energy sources, and then this border carbon adjustment tax, where Republicans are one by one in the Senate starting to say, hey, I think this is a good idea.
Yeah, real centrists like Congressman, or former Congressman, your former colleague, now Senator Kramer from North Dakota, has endorsed this idea.
That's right, a hardcore conservative.
Yeah. So Leader McCarthy appears to be sold on the value of this agenda as well. He's set up this climate task force in the House. It's meant to produce what would become a governing legislative framework to be rolled out this summer. Reading the tea leaves, our understanding is it'll have a focus on innovation and on permitting reform and on unlocking domestic critical minerals and cleaner resources and on competition with China and Russia, of course, and on natural climate solutions and on adaptation. So a pretty broad agenda. In our final 2 minutes here, I'd love to just talk politics. So folks are heading into a tough election cycle, probably with the wind at their back for conservatives and all this. How do you think, if at all, this issue plays in the coming cycle? I mean, clearly, Leader McCarthy thought it was valuable enough to start this activity, but how do you all see this?
I think it's to be part of the discussion and needs to be part of the discussion. 80% of voters say Republicans should be involved in this, but only 40% think we are. And so and the younger voter bloc cares more about this than the older voter bloc. And so there's a future here for Republicans. Second, I think the supply chain vulnerabilities and the things we're seeing, big issue, and this ought to be part of that. I think it can be a big part of this, and I think energy especially, and when you look at cost, you cannot, no matter what you do in this space or any space, you cannot forget the consumer. And at a time when you got inflation, we're celebrating, it went down to 8.3% from 8.5. That's hardly cause for celebration. You can't get baby food in the stores, apparently. I mean, all these things are going on. There are a lot of issues. But there's a path here to deal with grid security. I think we ought to take another look at autonomous vehicle legislation. When you look at what you could do to free up better transportation through urban areas, I think that can work. We passed it almost unanimously when I was chairman, but it got bollocksed up in the place where all good legislation goes to die, the United States Senate. I'm going to leave Carlos the remaining.
You notice we only had the People's House represented.
That's right.
Carlos, a final word from you on politics.
I'll just say quickly, if Republicans do take over the House, which is very likely, anything can change, but it's very likely today, this will be the first Republican House majority that starts a new Congress with an agenda for climate policy.
That's right.
An agenda to reduce emissions, to make energy delivery more efficient in the United States. And that alone should give us so much optimism and hope. Not that it's going to be easy. I mean, the higher profile this issue gets, the less likely that we'll get solutions. I mean, think about all the big high profile issues like immigration, gun safety, abortion. The higher profile the issue, the worse it is for the delivery of solutions. The model would be criminal justice reform, where we got to do this together. We transformed millions of lives just by passing a bill, did it in a bipartisan way. You know, Donald Trump with the Republican and Democratic support in Congress. That's how we have to think about this issue. If we do, it's not going to make the top headlines, so you'll have to dig, but there will be plenty to celebrate along the way.
Here's to boring, quiet climate policy.
Amen.
Right? Bipartisan climate policy. With that, let me have a huge round of applause to thank these two leaders for everything they've done. Thank you all.
And now, Katherine Murdoch.
So, how's climate communications going? The good news is that 70% of Americans are now worried about climate change. That's up from 57% in 2017, which means people are ready for action. The bad news is that those worried people feel hopeless, young people especially. 75% believe the future is frightening. Many believe they shouldn't have children. 1 in 3 feel depressed often. And it's no wonder. Our conception of the future is pretty bleak. Cultural imaginations are almost uniformly dystopian, especially for young audiences. Okay, for all audiences. So it's not surprising that doomerism abounds. But the thing is, to sum up the recent IPCC report, we have the technologies to bend the curve on warming. They are affordable, but we do not have the public and therefore the political will. This chart from the IEA is worth looking really closely at, because a lot of what we hear about is that tiny little orange part on the left, behavior changes. That's where all the guilt and shame comes in. And on the right, a lot of hope is placed on some miracle technology of the future. But what we really need right now is a lot more attention on the middle, scaling up existing technology that works. The environmental movement has been good at stopping things, but now we need to get good at building things, like support for green energy, smart grids, energy-efficient buildings, and clean transport. Even if we are not perfectly politically aligned with the entrepreneurs who make them, maybe especially so. Because we do not yet have the political will to put policies in place that are ambitious enough to solve the problem. We can't fix big problems if we don't agree on what they are. We are more polarized as a country than ever before, and science, especially climate science, has been wildly politicized. In fact, the single biggest predictor of how you feel about climate is your political party. I'd hate to see what this looks like for today. In an environment like that, people are afraid to speak up. Celebrities, public figures, and climate scientists would rather stay silent than risk charges of hypocrisy or failing purity tests that, by the way, no one can pass. The most common charge is about flying. How dare you take a plane to a climate conference? Charges of hypocrisy are more about dividing us and keeping leaders from being bold. Why don't we have the political will? Why do we fight each other on this? Yes, billions of dollars have been spent by the fossil fuel lobby, but just as important, we are not communicating in a way that people can relate to. Futurist Ari Wallach sums it up well.
Like a lot of people, I look around me and start worrying. The end of the rainforest, democracy under siege, viruses taking over our lives, robots coming for our jobs.
You're in a Johnny Cash.
And looming over it all, the climate crisis.
The world's coming to an end relatively quickly.
Experts keep telling me we're just on a glide path to the apocalypse.
How are you feeling right now, given the state of the world and climate change?
It's a pretty dire situation. The wildfires in California, the changes in storm systems, everything seems to be coming to a head. That means some pretty terrible things for our future.
And all the futures I see on TV and the movies are just more of the same. I mean, did you ever compare Wikipedia's list of dystopian films to its list of utopian films?
I believe a society that can only imagine dystopias eventually ends up as one. Great sports coaches know that in order to achieve a goal, setting that Olympic record, achieving that grand slam, swishing that three-pointer as the bell rings, you have to be able to visualize doing it. The magic ratio of coaching is 5 pieces of positive feedback for every piece of negative feedback. What do you think the climate communication ratio is? We need to change the conversation. And a handful of organizations that we support are doing this. What if we used humor instead of fear? Studies show that humor is one of the most effective tools for conversation because it disarms the ideological part of your brain, making you more receptive to alternative messages. Here's an example which significantly increased climate concern among young conservative men here in Florida.
It all started as a simple routine beer run. So me and my buddy here found this big-ass gator. Except the real one was bigger and realer. Anyways, we took it with us. Me and this gator was just minding our own business. Maybe we got a little wild.
Is he taking the last bit of beer? Are you taking the last bit? Come here, bring yours.
We started playing a little gator tag. The next thing I know, I became a national headline. If you're a fan of Florida man stories, you should know we're an endangered species. Scientists now forecast in the next decade, 1.3 million homes in Florida alone will be at risk of flood due to rising sea levels. 1.3 million homes? Think about what that's going to do to Florida man's natural habitat. Screw the polar bears. Save me instead. Tell the man to save Florida man. Visit SaveFloridaMan.com.
Right? What if we used messengers people trusted? Science Moms, a group of climate scientists who are also mothers, educate other moms about what's at stake for their kids and empower them to take climate action with simple tools that fit into moms' lives. The organization is anchored in the love parents have for their children versus policies and politics, and it works. Who knows the weather better than a weatherman? Local meteorologists are friendly faces people trust to give them accurate information. Some of them are starting to educate their viewers in both red and blue states about the connection between the weather they're experiencing and climate change.
Because as you look back over the course of the centuries, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is very closely tied to what our average temperatures are. Increased CO2 means increased temperatures across the planet.
And to make wind and solar energy outputs part of daily conversation.
The one good thing the wind brings, a whole lot of wind energy. This is from our partners at Climate Central. Wind electricity generation across the state of Texas tomorrow apparently should be more than enough to power every single home in the whole state. That's pretty remarkable.
What if we made actions fun instead of daunting? Vote Like a Madre is a Spanish language campaign that asks Latina moms to pinky promise their kids they'll vote for candidates with bold climate plans. The promise becomes an act of hope that is contagious. Even J-Lo got on board. What if our choices were clear? Climate Central specializes in visualizations that show places we love affected by sea level rise. This is the Sacred Heart Church in Tampa on our current path. And this is what it looks like if we sharply cut carbon pollution. And this is Miami, with only 2 degrees of warming. I had a picture of 4 degrees, but it was all underwater. What if scientists and the media understood each other? Sciline defines diverse and expert scientists who are good communicators to respond to journalists on deadline. What if we all heard about climate change more often? Climate change is the most existential threat facing humanity, and the average American hears about it less than once a month. The new AP Climate Desk aims to bring more climate news to more people through a nonpartisan lens. What if we celebrated our wins? We've patched the hole in the ozone. We stopped acid rain. We've brought fisheries back from collapse. Endangered species have come off the list. The air in LA is pretty clean now. We can do it again. What if climate change was a mainstream plot point? NRDC's Rewrite the Future works with writers to bring realistic and relevant storylines into popular shows and movies. And the Good Energy Playbook is a resource for screenwriters. We named our foundation Quadrivium because we believe that our society is at a crossroads. We are making choices now that will affect generations to come. The climate community also has a choice. We can stay insular, focusing on shame, fear, and ideology, or we can recognize that in order to solve a problem that affects everyone, we will need to speak in a way that includes everyone. We need to stop wallowing in apocalypse and start working towards futures we want to live in, with functioning political systems, with regenerative agriculture, with human-centered technology, with stakeholder capitalism, with thriving fisheries, with diversity in ideas and experience, as well as biodiverse and abundant nature. Okay, this is a good video. If we can imagine a better future and champion those building a pathway to it, we might just make it come true. Thank you.
And now, please welcome to the stage Vic Barrett.
Hi, all you guys. Vic Barrett Nidibe Garifuna Nguya. That basically means my name is Vic Barrett. I'm Garifuna. I'm a first-generation American, and basically the Garifuna are an indigenous people that live on the northern coast of Honduras, and that's where my family is from. I started my journey into climate change 9 years ago when I was 14. So if we're doing the math right, I think I'm 23, I'm pretty sure. But I started that journey through the lens of climate justice, through recognizing that my identities were inherently intertwined with the undeniable, I hope, and worldwide understood, we'd hope, and consensus that climate change disproportionately impacts certain communities, believe it or not. That could be a whole other talk, and if you have more questions about that, you could find me. I'll recommend some books, maybe explain it to you. But my first campaign that I ever worked on when I was 14 years old was to mandate climate education in New York City public schools. Basically working with my peers and realizing, like, you know, the 10 of us might be here getting free Metro cards and free pizza, but if we want to get our peers to join us in working towards building campaigns that mitigate the climate crisis, they need to know what the climate crisis is and how it affects them. And since then, since doing that work when I was 14, 9 years ago, I've attended a bunch of COP conferences. I've sued the US federal government as part of Juliana versus United States. Just to say, I'm very aware of institutions and how they work. And even as I've grown more skeptical of the change that can be made through institutions and within certain systems, I've never let go in my faith of other young people, and I've never let go of my faith in education, and I've never let go of my faith in my peers and our ability to actually make a massive amount of difference when we work together. So why I'm here is the Aspen Institute invited me to join the K-12 Climate Action Initiative. Basically, an initiative to use the educational sector as a force for climate action. And I knew I wanted to be involved. It felt like a very circular moment to know that where I started was working on climate education, and what I could be working on right now is climate education. So we have a bipartisan commission that's come together, a group of educators, environmentalists, civil rights leaders, the whole basket, recognizing the urgency of climate change and the need for education to determine its role in part of the solution. So over the course of the year, as a commission, we've had amazing commissioners. Carlos was one of our commissioners who just spoke up here and gave a really amazing talk. We held a listening tour. We heard from students, parents, educators, administrators, and more about the need to support schools in advancing climate solutions and the incredible work going on across the country in terms of trying to get young people more literate in what climate change is and how we can face it. Schools are among the largest consumers of energy in the public sector. We have 480,000 school buses across the country. Our schools operate the largest mass transit fleet in the country. And they also serve 7 billion meals each year. And you know, I'm sure all of you know that adds up to a lot of emissions. But also at the end of the day, schools are where young people spend most of their time. Schools are where young people learn what community is. The cafeteria is where young people learn what community is. And so it's important that we're reaching students where they're at. There's an incredible opportunity to support our schools in taking action on climate change when we consider the fact that, you know, after all those numbers I just gave to you, when schools adapt and transition to clean energy and adapt to climate impacts, they teach students about climate solutions firsthand. And these are the same students that we tend to praise when hundreds of thousands of us show up in the streets or show up in front of our city halls, and when the media says that we're the future. Those are those same students, and so we need to be fostering them. We need to be making sure that they actually are getting the intergenerational assistance that they need, and schools are the best place that we can make that happen. The fact is, students in Miami probably already know that they're at the ground zero for climate change, but what are we going to do about that? Are they just going to sit with that knowledge? Are they just going to let that knowledge fester? Or are we going to let them know how they can make a difference about it? So this past fall, our commission has released an action plan for policy recommendations to support our schools in this work, and we envision a future where the hundreds of thousands of schools that exist in the United States are actually beacons for climate action, and I think a lot of young people envision that future as well. So it's really time for us to step up, and it's really time for our students to know that they're the future and for us to encourage that. And I'm really appreciative of the Aspen Institute for creating an environment where we can actually talk about that and make sure that that happens. Because if you're going to pat the young person you know on the back and say you're going to change the world, it would be really nice if you would help. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Joan Salwen and John Shulkin.
I am the child and the grandchild and the great-grandchild of the Iowa farm, which is still in our family, and we've been raising livestock for a very long time. My grandfather, he died without really knowing that his livelihood was coming at a cost to the atmosphere and to the future of the planet. The way Mother Nature engineered these guys was to have 4 stomachs, and the first one is where all the grass that a cattle eats gets fermented. And it's that process of fermentation that creates the methane burps. Cow burps globally are equivalent to the emissions from all cars. It's a huge problem. 1.5 billion cows burp about 3 gigatons of CO2 every year. And I've always wondered, is there something that can be done about this? We talk about electrifying cars and putting solar on homes and creating wind farms. Isn't anybody going to do something about cattle? Blue Ocean Barns feeds seaweed to cows to stop them from burping methane. Good quality red seaweed can reduce methane emissions in a cow by 80% or more. And that is enormous and vital for our fight against climate change. We did a lot of work with seaweed cultivation and understanding the plant. We came to a point where this innovation needed a commercial engine, because even though a tiny bit is needed in the cow's diet, probably less than 0.5% needs to be this red seaweed, kind of a little sprinkling of cilantro, if you will. When you think that we have 100 million cows in this country, even if they all get a little sprinkle every single day, we're going to need a lot of seaweed. We are hearing from food companies. They want to be leaders in this space who make available to their customers low-emission products, just as they are proud to provide organic products. Farmers, in general, are resourceful, ingenious, creative people. And if my grandfather had known that his cows were creating a problem in the environment, he sure would have tried to find out a way to solve that problem. And I feel that he might have been proud of me for trying to find a solution.
Joan is amazing, right? She's amazing.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. I'm John Shulkin. I serve as the co-president of Valor Equity Partners. I've been there for 23 years, half my life now. You heard Antonio speak yesterday. Our mission at the firm is to invest, partner, and serve outstanding entrepreneurs and founders that are making positive change in the world. And we've been investing in companies doing this for a very long time, at Tesla, at SpaceX, and Solar City. And the story with Joan here starts, we founded a fund back in 2018 called Valor Siren Ventures, and it's focused in around food technology, retail technology, and sustainability. And uniquely in this fund, we had Starbucks anchor the fund, Nestle, Target, Marriott, Gordon Food Service, a number of other companies, with the idea that we would see innovation in this space. So we're investing in very early stage companies that we help grow, we serve them operationally. The story here with Joan, I met Joan through a very close friend of mine, and she was solving this massive problem, which we learned a lot about in talking with her. And I thought we might start with the idea that starting a company is hard. Starting a company in sustainability is really hard, and it is really, really hard to start a company in sustainability that launches in the middle of COVID. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So yes, we did start this company during COVID. We got to a point of growth where in March of 2020, we really needed to begin building our technology. And that needed to be in Hawaii. There was no other choice. That's where the seaweed is available. It grows natively, and there's a fabulous facility there that pumps ocean water directly into tanks that we were going to use to create our seaweed. Well, everybody shut down, of course, in that time in 2020. But you should know, Hawaii shut down like a boss. There were no planes coming in, there were no boats coming in. When planes started to fly again in May, I lied to Hawaiian Airlines, telling them that I was an agricultural worker and was an essential employee.
And so I got a seat on the plane, but I did not get a legal apartment or Airbnb because there was no such thing. So I made some very ingenious choices to figure out where I was going to sleep and how this was going to work. But we had to be there because no one had ever grown this seaweed before. We needed to cultivate it, so we needed to create seeds for the very first time. And we needed to figure out how to scale up from very small cultures of this seaweed into commercial scale crop kinds of things. So I'm glad we did get there. While there, my team started to grow, and we did figure out how to grow a plant that is actually 10 times better than the way nature grows it. With the growth conditions that we have, the way we manage the seaweed in its early days, of course, not GMO or anything, but we have found a way to invent a plant, essentially, that is very fast growing, very dense, very able to grow in a tank-based environment, such that we could and will feed all 100 million cows in the United States on a parcel of land that, if it were all pulled together, would be 1/5 of the size of Walt Disney World Resort. People think to feed 100 million cows or 1.5, we're going to have to take over the whole darn ocean, or whatever. And it's actually, we've figured out a way to make this work on a very small footprint. So we're excited to have done that. We also have innovated not only with our technology and with our plant, but with our business model and our product. And John, I'd love for you to tell the story of that.
Great. So one of the things that we very much believe in investing in any company, and this obviously applies to sustainability, is that you have to build a sustainable business. You have to build a business that generates return on capital. It has to be an engine that works. And Joan had tried this in a not-for-profit model, tried this a few ways. And originally we were going to go with a plan where we were going to sell the feed additive to farmers. And Joan tells the story of that would involve people walking down a dusty dirt road with a satchel, selling to individual farmers. We said, that just doesn't sound like a very good idea. No. And in doing that, we also thought to ourselves, well, what is the fastest way, the lowest friction way for this to get adopted such that we could actually solve the problem quickly? And we spent a lot of time with a few of our strategic investors, one of them being Nestle, who's the biggest dairy user in the world. And they taught us about something called inset credits, which I'm sure most of the people in this room know about, that it would not be credible for them or allowable for them to buy offset credits of CO2 to actually solve this problem inside of their dairy supply chain. And in learning about this, we also learned that that is the only way they can meet their 2025 and 2030 sustainability goals. And because of that, that is the way that we decided to iterate the business model. Then with Nestle, we also found out that there are none of these credits available today. So from there, what we did is said, let's give this product away for free to the farmers, which we are starting to do now.
Let that sink in. It's free to farmers.
So the farmers use it. The farmers use it not just because it's the right thing to do for the world, but the studies we've done say that it actually lowers their overall feed costs. So the farmers not only get it for free, but they can make more money, which is a great thing. And the corporates, who are our partners in this, and Joan will share some announcements that have just come out about the company. We have some more coming in the next week or two. They will actually buy the inset credits from us. So we have contracts now forming with these corporates. And in terms of, just a show of hands here to ask a question, how many of you would pay 10 cents more for a cup of coffee, or 25 cents more for a pint of ice cream, or maybe 30 cents more for a gallon of milk to have it be methane-free and save the planet? You see a lot of hands raised. Well, that is actually not what it costs. Joan?
Our product adds less than a nickel to the cost of a gallon of milk. So it's very cost effective.
And I think it's 1 penny for a pint of ice cream, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So we can solve this problem. So by innovating the business model here, in addition to all the work the team has done to actually produce the product, improve the product, something that's perfectly safe for the cows to eat and is a permanent change in terms of methane emissions, we can do this for almost no incremental cost to either the user or the consumer, who's ever actually behind the product, which is, I think, and build a sustainable business in terms of the economic engine.
And that leads to a further point about the role of corporations. We're very proud that we operate a very capitalistic business. We are able to do our work and sell it to customers for which there's a lot of demand for our product. So we're not using any government support, or we're not relying on taxes or on mandates. Our customers are very, very eager to use our product. And just this week, Ben & Jerry's announced that they are partnering with us, and they're rolling this out to their farms in the US and the Netherlands. Yeah. Yeah, cool. I think it'd be good potentially to talk a little bit about impact, because we haven't yet said my favorite.
That's why we're here, right?
Yeah, and we haven't said my favorite number, which is 80. As you heard in the film, there are very few technologies that are effective on any kind of gas, as we are, and ours wipes out 80% of the methane gas from cows. I want to talk a little bit about...
Which people should know they burp.
They do burp,
That's
yes.
the burping. Yeah.
It's burping, it's not farting. So sorry. I apologize to every 13-year-old boy in the room. It's burping. So if we think about other ways to reduce carbon emissions, let's think about, well, for one thing, we should do everything we can do to reduce carbon emissions. I'm not going to denigrate planting trees, because we have to plant trees. But let's just say that you had 1 acre of aspiring little seedlings that want to be a forest. So you got 1 acre. In the first year of that acre's life, those little guys will sequester 2/3 of a ton of carbon, which is really not very good performance. But the good news is it's going to grow and grow over time, and by its 10th year, it's going to sequester 2.5 metric tons of carbon, which now we're going places. So contrast that to our cow. One big Holstein, like you see on the Chick-fil-A billboards, over the course of a year will, by being fed a little bit of our product, reduce her methane emissions equivalent to 3 tons of carbon rather than 2.5.
So because my job is earlier today to go run the numbers on this for Joan, just to put that into perspective, there's 1.8 million dairy cattle in California alone. So that is one of the first markets we're actually deploying the product into. And so I had to write this stuff down to make sure I get it right. But so using the numbers of 2/3 of a ton for 1 acre of trees the first year, you would have to plant the equivalent of 8.1 million acres of trees to get the impact in year 1 that we would get from feeding all 1.8 million dairy cattle in California, which, to put that in perspective, is about 12,600 square miles, which is somewhere between the size of Maryland and Vermont. In year 10, so waiting 10 years later, you would get 2.5 tons per acre of carbon taken out of the atmosphere. That is effectively, with the same number of cattle in California, 2.1 million acres, about 3,300 square miles, and that's somewhere between the size of Delaware and Connecticut. And that's just California. This is a product that can be deployed in the US, it can be deployed in India, it can be deployed all throughout the world as Joan scales up the production in these aquaculture facilities and actually solve this problem, which one of the things we talk about internally, and Joan and I have talked a lot about, what's incredible about this is actually nature gave us the beginning of this solution.
Yeah, nature gave us both the problem and the solution, which is a pretty sweet circle. I think a lot of the things that we are going to have to do as a society to solve the climate crisis are going to be hard, and they're going to take a long time. Think about how long it will take to, retrofit all of our energy systems, all of our transportation systems. There's going to be job displacement. There's going to be enormous amount of change in order to make that happen. This solution is effective on the very first day you feed it to a cow, the very first day. And we're going to start feeding cows this year, which is going to be very exciting. And because of the way we've designed the business model and the frictionless adoption by the farmer, it really is the easy button. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you.
Please welcome Mayors LaToya Cantrell and Justin Bibb with Alex Harris of the Miami Herald.
Put the man in the middle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Harris. I cover climate change for the Miami Herald, and we are so lucky enough to be joined tonight by two mayors, which, as we know, cities are the front lines of the climate crisis, and mayors are often in charge of making that policy that figures out how we're going to survive, how we're going to do it, how we're going to adapt. So I'd like you guys to meet today the mayor of Cleveland, Justin Bibb, and the mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell. So to get us started, I would love for you guys to tell me a little bit more about what unique climate risks your cities face. Like, obviously, everyone around the country experiences a little bit different, but tell me about Cleveland. What are you worried about?
Well, I'm in my 5th month as mayor. We took the reins on January 3rd, and Cleveland has just a unique story when it comes to our fight for climate and environmental justice. For folks that don't know, our river caught on fire in 1969, and the first mayor of a major city, black mayor of a major American city, Carl Stokes, really led the fight to help us get the Clean Water Act and the EPA. And so we are at the vanguard of this movement, and I take this very seriously as mayor. One of the things I did was we made sure that in every job description in my cabinet, we had a focus on climate and environmental justice. So it's embedded in our DNA as a city. Secondly, Cleveland is the poorest big city in America right now, and we are the most energy burdened city in the country when it comes to the cost that it has on working families across our community. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we extend the benefits of the green economy. We just launched several weeks ago a low to moderate income solar project program where 10 families will have free solar panels on their homes to lower their utility costs. And so we want to make sure that it impacts their daily lived experience every single day.
Absolutely. Got it. How about New Orleans? Well, thank you so much. Well, the city of New Orleans is on the front lines of climate change. I've been serving now as mayor for 4 years. 2 weeks after I was inaugurated, I was picked up by a high water vehicle from my home just due to a rainfall. The rainfall is coming faster, it's coming harder. But New Orleans is positioned along the Mississippi River, faced with the high river every now and then, Lake Pontchartrain, and of course the Gulf of Mexico. We are seeing, and we had the wettest year was in 2021, and that was since the 1800s when the National Weather Service began to document rainfall. But the thing is this, because we're uniquely positioned, and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which put us front and center, we have been able to spend down federal resources to deal with holding water and freeing it up from running into our drains. And so a tragedy has really turned into a horrible opportunity for the city of New Orleans. Learning how to live with water is what we have to do. And adaptation is now. And so we have, and we're spending millions on green infrastructure, blue and green, repurposing, of course, creating systems that hold water, and being very intentional about where these investments are going, and particularly areas that took on that water after Hurricane Katrina. So I'm thinking about Gentilly. We just cut the ribbon on that, holding 8 million gallons of water. Also looking at how we repurpose our playgrounds, holding millions of gallons of water, our city park, you name it. Teaching our residents to hold water on their homes. Solar for All programs that are going on across the city of New Orleans. Making sure that our churches are even repurposing their parking lots. You know, churches, we want a parking lot. Well, wait a minute. You gotta hold that water. And so on many different levels and areas throughout the city of New Orleans, our focus is on holding water, freeing it up, but even today, advanced a CEA agreement that will allow the city of New Orleans to create and build and structure a power plant that would, one, reduce our carbon footprint by 35%, So we're being very intentional, very serious about this because we are on the front lines and the future of our city depends upon us learning how to live with water.
Well, I want to come back to a lot of what you just said, but I want to, knowing about both of your cities and our conversations backstage a little bit, I know that climate justice and environmental justice, like you just mentioned, is very central to both of you in your cities. How are members of your community being uniquely affected or, are experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis a little bit more than people in other cities? You talk about energy burdens in Cleveland.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest insights I had over the last 2 years as I was campaigning to be mayor was COVID-19 had a tremendous impact on the working conditions and the quality of life of many of our residents. And one thing that we learned throughout the pandemic was that the quality of your neighborhood amenities truly matter. And in many parts of our city, in our Black and brown communities, there aren't quality grocery stores, not good quality public transit. Parks weren't really accessible to many of our underserved communities of color. And so one thing we're doing right now is we want to be one of the first cities in North America to truly adopt a 15-minute city concept. So regardless of where you live in Cleveland, there's a good quality grocery store, a good quality park, and good quality public transit. And it's important. This is important for so many reasons. Because for us to truly achieve our climate goals as a nation, and globally, I would say, we have to break down these very complex issues into how they impact everyday people. And sometimes when you're seeing debates in Washington, you're not seeing that. And as mayors, we don't have that luxury. So we have to make sure it actually matters in terms of everyday working conditions of the residents that we're trying to impact and serve.
Absolutely. As mayors, we are on the front lines too. And we serve everybody.
Yes. Regardless of political party.
Regardless of political party, we serve everyone. In the same anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the 16th year, even last year, we were faced with Hurricane Ida. And Hurricane Ida came in as a Cat 4, but upgraded to a Cat 5. When Ida was coming our way, we were also experiencing a heat advisory. And so the investments that we had started to make prior to Ida, like ensuring that transfer switches were installed on our rec centers throughout neighborhoods in the city, proved to be the best thing to do as we initiated that in 20, because here comes Ida, wiped out our grid. We were out of electricity for up to 2 weeks' time. Heat advisory, New Orleans, come on, you know how we, in terms of the climate there. But we were able to immediately connect with generators to provide our residents with access to the resources and cooling stations that were necessary to preserve their quality of life. That proved to be extremely effective. So what I'm saying is that being intentional about where we're investing and to make sure that the most vulnerable are being invested in directly, because it's not a matter of if, it's when. And so lesson learned from Ida, now we're expanding that capacity in terms of transfer switches on all of our rec centers throughout the city of New Orleans. And we even had to activate our transit, our buses, making sure that buses were stationed throughout various areas throughout the city for cooling as well, even for pets. And so learning, from the experience that we have, every storm is different, but you have to learn from it and improve and to be better. And hurricane season is coming our way June 1st, but we will be prepared in ways that we were not on last year. So it's always trying to be better every step of the way.
I want to come back to what you talked about earlier about living with water. I know New Orleans is coming up with some really interesting ideas about redeveloping neighborhoods to store more water. Individual homeowners will pay for you to get landscaping that absorbs more water. What are some of the innovative ideas that you guys are working with to, convince your residents that you have to live with the water that comes in?
Sure. So one of the biggest challenges about it is convincing people and bringing them along. But what we have found with our Pontilli area, for example, when we initially broke ground, it was viewed as a disruptor, oh, infrastructure, oh my God, I can't get to my house fast enough. It's just a pain in the behind. And so once the project, and prior to it even being completed, we got these just torrential rainfalls. And residents were able to say, wow, they're seeing it working. So when people can see the investments truly impacting their daily quality of life, they buy into it. And so wanting to ensure that every step we're bringing people along, even in terms of design. So one example is our libraries. Redesigning it to ensure that it captures the water from the roof, how that water drains, slowly going into bioswales, freeing it up from going directly into the drains. That's how we're embracing green infrastructure and now pivoting to that growth sector so that we can train a workforce to maintain these infrastructure investments in our city. Again, bringing people along, being able to build wealth and transferable wealth, which is necessary in the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, especially as rebuilding, even
Absolutely.
16 years after Katrina, is still rebuilding.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about energy burdens. You came up with it again. You talked about your solar plans and the way you want to see that expand in Cleveland, but Cleveland still has coal. What can you do to switch the city to more renewable energy?
Yeah, we're in a unique position. The former mayor of Cleveland, Tom Johnson, is considered one of the architects of progressivism in this country. And he led the way to create one of the first publicly owned utilities in the city of Cleveland. And right now, Cleveland Public Power has an unfortunate issue where we are still getting our power generation source from fossil fuels. And our contractor for power generation is the third largest carbon emitter in the United States. And it's undermining our ability as a nation to achieve the Paris climate goals. And the unique thing about that is in the early 2000s, the prior administration approved a 50-year contract with this power generation source. So I'm burdened with a 50-year contract that I'm working my tail off to make sure we get out of it in some way. And what we want to do is really shift our reliance from fossil fuels at Cleveland Public Power, really leverage our Great Lake Erie for wind sources, and also make sure that we're using solar as a key driver for Cleveland Public Power so we can extend the benefits of the green economy to all of our residents across our city.
Absolutely. Well, wish best of luck in getting out of that contract.
I need some good lawyers, by the way.
You can do it, brother.
Thank you.
So I know you're new and you've been around for a minute, but what are you most excited about in the climate solutions that you have brought to bear, or you hope to bring to bear in your cities? We'll start with you, Mayor. What are you most excited about?
What I'm most excited about is so many things, but when I think about the workforce in the city of New Orleans, and I think about the disparity gaps, that have existed for generations, and that wealth gap and lack of transferable wealth, I'm excited about investments like Chase has made in our workforce, a 3-year commitment where we're able to train our young people, for jobs of the future, but are jobs right now, and they're sustainable jobs and larger than a living wage. And this is something that is essential, I think, to building wealth in our community, but also pivoting off of hospitality, which has been our main economic driver. Playing to that strength is great, but we have to diversify our economy. And because New Orleans is on the front lines of climate change, it has opened up a real opportunity for us to bring our people along, but where they can truly, truly build wealth and pull themselves and us collectively out of poverty.
I think we're seeing a shift in the paradigm of this conversation from, it being an abstract conversation with experts in Davos, and that's it, to us as mayors talking in barbershops and salons and in churches about the green economy and what climate resiliency and what climate justice looks like. Just last week, I had a really good conversation with our police leadership and our police monitoring team. Folks that don't know, Cleveland currently is under a second consent decree with the Department of Justice in terms of patterns of police misconduct. And we had a conversation about adding public health and the impact of the built environment when it comes to community policing conversations, because right now, due to this consent decree, 20% of my officer's time has to be spent on community policing. So instead of an officer just handing out ice cream cones or playing basketball, we're talking about where can we plant more trees when you're not on a priority 1 or priority 2 911 call? Where are there potholes or where we need more bike lanes on the street? So public safety is talking about the importance of how do you improve the built environment of our most disenfranchised parts of our city. That's the climate change conversation we should be having right now in this country, because that's how you know it's impacting people's everyday lives on a very tangible level.
Cops planting trees. What an idea.
Let's start the movement.
Yeah. Well, I want to play off that a little bit about tree cover. And we talked a little bit about climate justice earlier and extreme heat and the way it is in New Orleans in the summer when your power gets knocked out. Do you have plans to, moving forward, address the way that tree cover is sort of unequal in the city of Cleveland, or more heat shelters? I know is something that New Orleans has also discussed. How are you going to address extreme heat in your cities?
Well, we were once known as the forest city in Cleveland. And unfortunately, we've lost track on many of those aspects of enhancing our tree canopy as a community. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is the quality of our air. We have the 5th worst air quality in the country right now, high rates of asthma in many of our most disenfranchised parts of our city. You can walk a couple blocks and see a dramatic change in the air quality that we have in our city. And so what we're trying to do is take a block by block approach to plant more trees and give our residents the tools they need on what kind of trees should be planted and how do you maintain that tree canopy over a long period of time. The other thing I would say is we need to do a better job as a country of investing in minority-owned tree canopy businesses because we have these major MBE requirements in terms of city spend, but we can't find good minority contractors to help us plant more trees. And so that's one part of the conversation I think we need to focus on in the future.
Job creation.
Absolutely. And we have thoroughly assessed our urban canopy where there are disparity gaps in neighborhoods. Recently was able to get the public to approve a historical bond sale of $500 million right before the pandemic. Thank God for that, because that's serving as an economic stimulus on our own. But we're using our dollars to invest over $4 million in our urban canopy over the next couple of years. And this is something that the residents have been asking for, but it's something that you can build community as well. Getting your residents involved in it is front and center. It's necessary because they need to know not only that it impacts them directly, but there is a major role that they can play. And of course, with cooling our sidewalks and the like, and just overall landscaping. Planning, landscaping right in front of their homes where they're a part of maintaining it. So bringing the community along is essential as well. It's necessary.
Tree cover is always something I feel like that gets everyone going in a city, no matter what your politics may be about climate change. Everybody usually has opinions on trees.
You got to meet them where they are.
Absolutely.
And how are you doing that in your cities? How are you reaching across the divide to come up with solutions, infrastructure, moving forward ideas that reach out to the people in your city who may not agree or understand all of the science about climate change?
Well, I put together in 2018 a climate equity action committee that's made up of residents, major stakeholders across the city, but also with government departments. And so monthly we get together, they review plans prior to whether it's RFPs going out, also weighing in on where we should focus or prioritize initiatives or projects. So that's a way of embedding the community's voice into the process. Bottom up has to happen. That's where I've got my legs, bottom up, community organizing 101 after Hurricane Katrina. So really embedding that into how we work, but engage our residents in the process. It's proven to be very effective. And again, once people see the results of their work and their voices seem to matter, it's a reflection of the results on the ground, then again, it only gets more people involved, more people excited about the progress we're making, but also where we need to go, because we're not there yet. But we're taking the right steps to get there.
Mayor Cantrell is spot on in this notion. We, as elected officials, we have to continue to listen, even after the election. And you have to continue to engage residents on a daily basis. When I got elected, we had a massive transition process, and we engaged over 500 community leaders, from activists to corporate CEOs, to really talk about what our climate justice agenda should be once we took office. Next year, we'll be modernizing our climate action plan as a city, and we want to truly create a public-private partnership in order to do that. But I would also say that what we're trying to do is bring government back to the people. And this old idea that you have to get on a bus or pay $10 for parking to come and see your government, to me, is completely outdated. We have to make sure we're meeting people where they are, and really over-communicate the progress that we're making. On a separate issue, not related to climate change, that speaks to the notion of this, we just passed historic legislation with the earned income tax credit and the child care tax credit. And our administration, including myself, we knocked on doors to talk to residents about signing up for that tax credit with tax preparers with us. And I did it with our senior senator, Senator Sherrod Brown. That's what residents expect from us as mayors. Because not everyone has social media. Not everyone's on Twitter or Facebook. Not many of our residents have access to the internet. And so we have to truly meet our residents where they are to make sure we're talking about what's working, what's not working, and how their voice can be a part of how we advance these issues all across our city.
Good job with that tax credit.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Good job with that.
Thank
Yeah. In New Orleans, a couple Saturdays ago, we had an election. We pushed on the ground, Mayor, for an early childhood millage where 0 to 3
there we go.
will have an early learning seat in the city of New Orleans.
That's great. That's great.
That's great. I love the door knocking. Keep it up. I hope there's other mayors listening to that and get good ideas.
It's one of the best parts of the job, door knocking, by the way.
Well, we heard a lot of really good ideas from both of you tonight about innovative ideas and solutions for climate change. How are you going to pay for it? It sounds like there's a bond. What are you looking to for finance? Are you looking from the federal government, from the state, from your own citizens? Where are you looking for cash?
All of the above, I would say. But I want to say this. Thank God we have a president in D.C. who cares about cities. The American Rescue Plan has been a lifesaver for us in Cleveland. I know it has been for you as well in New Orleans, Mayor.
Don't speak too much for that.
And it's important that we use this historic moment to leverage these investments to start to tackle these issues. In our second week in office, we made the announcement that we were going to allocate $17 million of our American Rescue Plan dollars to raise an additional $100 million from the private sector to work to eradicate the lead paint crisis in Cleveland. Almost every year, 1,000 children in our community is contaminated with lead paint, and it's public enemy number one. And so using these investments from the federal government and leveraging that capital with other additional dollars, I think will go a long way to create the right kind of down payment we need to get real change on these issues.
Sure, definitely the largest bucket is the federal government. And the city of New Orleans is currently spending federal money, $2 billion on infrastructure investments happening right now. But more than that, it's also leveraging dollars at the state level and local level and wanting to demonstrate that we as a city, we're willing to put skin in the game. But one of the things that I had to do earlier on in 2018 was take a fair share fight to the state of Louisiana, because New Orleans, as I mentioned, is a hospitality city that fuels the economy of the state. But our dollar that's generated in New Orleans, the majority will go to Baton Rouge and stay there. And so I said, listen, if cash registers don't ring in New Orleans, then if toilets don't flush in New Orleans, then cash registers can't ring in Baton Rouge. And was told, no way that you would get that done, but we delivered it for our city and then put those dollars immediately to work, creating transfer switches for our utility because to power the pumps and the like. But it's things like that that demonstrate that, one, not only are you asking for more, but you're also using those dollars wisely. So you're bringing folks along and other resources along with it. So leveraging every single dollar. ARPA money has been very effective for the city in terms of filling a gap because we had a deficit. Cultural city, hospitality city, we didn't have the luxury of doing other things just yet. And now, you are in a unique position there, Brother Mayor, because what we had in the state of Louisiana for New Orleans, our money, particularly the CARES Act money, was redirected, taken away from the city. We had to push very hard, working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, for a direct allocation. And so with IJA, my hope is that the formula works to our benefit, to where cities truly are funded directly in ways that cities like mine in the state of Louisiana, we just, I'm still waiting for $70 million to be reimbursed from the state based on the federal dollar that flowed through. So it's multiple different, challenges that we face, but at the end of the day, it's leveraging the dollar, spending it wisely so that we can get more from the public as well as from the private sector. It takes every dollar.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have this evening, but I think we can end on a message of give these mayors some more money, and please give them a round of applause.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Please join us tonight at 7:30 for a reception at the Faena Hotel.